Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the second of our autumn lecture series at the Stained Glass Museum. It's delighted to welcome you all. I know we've got some people from across the pond here tonight with us. My name is Jasmine Allen, and I'm the director and curator of the Stained Glass Museum. And it's my pleasure to say that we have a distinguished speaker from the States with us this evening. But as I said, I'm delighted to welcome Professor Virginia Raguin this evening. She's a distinguished American scholar, and I'm really pleased that she's agreed to speak to us this evening. I first encountered her work as a student, and she has written extensively on religious art, and best known certainly over here for her work on stained glass, both historic and modern. She's written about medieval glass, about 19th and 20th century glass, and catalogued various areas of American glass as part of the Corpus Vitriarum, the international project to catalogue medieval and stained glass across the world. Many of you will know her name from publications such as the Thames and Hudson publication in 2003, Stained Glass from its Origins to the Present, which I know is one of our biggest sellers in the museum shop. And at the Stained Glass Museum, we often get asked, do you have any La Farge or Tiffany in your collection? And I'm sorry to say that we don't at the moment. But of course, these are famous names across the world when people think of stained glass, and American opalescent glass, as we call it today, was enormously significant in the 19th and 20th century, and still has that high status today, and triggered a lot of other glass manufacturers to produce similar glass. So I'm delighted that we have an American speaker talking about this invention, which started in America. And over to you, Virginia, who I think you've got handle on the slides. I will disappear. I think you just need to unmute.
Okay. I found the spot. Yes, I'm unmuted. Fabulous. Well, Jasmine, thank you very much for this invitation. It's very exciting to talk about a museum that I've loved and respected a great deal over these years. The cathedral itself and indeed the museum are wonderful sites. Well, I wanted to begin by moving towards, here we are, this scene. That reminds you that the material that I'm speaking about today, and a great deal more information, specifics, including bibliography, where you can go to find more information, is found on my online book. Doesn't cost anything to get. It's right up there. It's online, and you can download all of the images. The 90% are produced by my husband and myself, and the others are copyright free or public. So it should enable people to find imagery of objects that are really far and that are difficult to photograph and that you can't find. Now, what I wanted to make very clear is that I've got, well, three principles maybe I want you to keep in mind. One is that all artists are part of their society and are influenced by other artists. The client plays a major role, especially in glass, since glass is almost always made to order, even roundels, okay? And that sight and audience, that is something even larger than the concept of the client, are vital elements in determining artistic choices. So where the glass will be, how deep the pocket of the client is, which people are always afraid to sort of get into, but it's a reality, All of these will determine what the window will look at. And it is of course, the artist who can seize on this moment and work creatively with the site and with people that brings something up that's really exciting. Now, what I wanted to begin with the concept that, yes, indeed, England, indeed, across the pond, right? Was very important in terms of the atmosphere that allowed opalescent or encouraged opalescent glass to develop, because it really was the aesthetic style beginning from about 1860 and lasting to about 1890 that set the tone for the opulent interior, full of sensuous lines, colors, textures, objects, in which a polished sheen, of a silver tea set, and a plate, and a vase, and a transparent glass, and satin and wood. All of these things were enormously important in a kind of symbiosis of an atmosphere of luxury. What happened with the Americans is they began to see, wait a minute, we can do something very different. But it fit with meeting the expectations of that kind of client. So that you had here that in the mid 80s, 90s, you have Gallet operating in France and Dome, which set the tone for Tiffany, for example, to say, well, I can make vases and lampshades that will fit the same needs that clients have who are patronizing these European glass manufacturers. And what happened in the United States is that it wasn't just Tiffany. In fact, Tiffany actually setting up what was called the Corona Glass Company was 10 years after places like Kokomo Opalescent Glass was founded. And I think this is the moment I can, say right up front, so keep it in mind. Tiffany was a business, in particular a business with very high-end clients and a huge, huge number of varieties of production, from window shades to glass to simple windows to very complicated windows. And marketing the name of Favril glass, that was sort of a very clever marketing ploy. Unless you have an absolute confirmation in a ticket of sale, and I'm not even sure I would actually believe that from the company, to tell you the truth, because you really don't know where the glass came from. There is documentation, and I have seen bills of sale, that Tiffany bought Kokomo stained glass. And which makes sense, right? When you might think you have enough material, and then you don't. And isn't that wonderful? You've got more clients. So you go out to someone else and you get the opalescent glass. It wasn't anything radically different. So that the marketing, the name Favril, I would say, should never be used unless it's a quote that basically says that you have absolute documentation, that was what the client believed the client was getting when they bought a particular window. Otherwise, it's a whole lot better just to use the term opalescent. Now, the atmosphere that I'm talking about here is pretty typical. Here you're looking at Henry Hobson Richardson, who was the seminal architect, quite honestly, in the 1870s, 80s, 90s, for these opulent interiors, public, which I think is so wonderful, right? This is a library created for the public in Quincy, Massachusetts, which is just, I'd say, 30 miles, less than that, 20 miles south of Boston. In many ways, it's considered, people live there as a suburb of Boston now. And you're looking at stained glass here this is not La Farge, but this is John La Farge, fits into this beautifully sensuous interior with woodwork, and obviously a time when libraries were the center of life. So this is 1881. So you can see the windows were quite important. Now, one way to think about the importance of opalescent glass and its widespread distribution in the United States is to think Harvard University. Harvard University's building was begun in the mid-1876. But its side windows here, and these windows are, shall we say, just cathedral glass, and were made by a Boston maker, McPherson. The side windows in this dining hall became the obligation of various classes. So there were gifts from various classes to the university. And you might imagine there was quite competition in terms of what quality artists you get to design these things. And after an initial beginning, shall we say from 1880 to 1902, almost all of the windows were opalescent glass by a variety of makers and many designers whose windows then were fabricated by the Tiffany studios. So there is, again, something to always think about in terms of the window, that you have a designer and you have a fabricator. Sometimes they are part of the same studio, but many, many, many times they are not. And that's the way it was definitely since 1500, to tell you the truth. Albrecht Dürer designed stained glass windows. He did not fabricate them. So the design was his, and the windows were fabricated by the studio at Nuremberg that he happened to be working with. These are the windows by Sarah Wyman Whitman, a superb individual, really, who created one called Peace and Honor. And you are looking here at what you can immediately see is this luxurious opalescent glass in which you have a lot of plating. And I'll talk about that later. Here is an example of Frederick Crowninshield, a sort of a Renaissance, you might see, obviously, inspired artist with Hector and Andromache, and then Edward Peck Sperry with Bernard of Clairvaux and Godfrey Bouillon, by the way, whose names are written in French up here. And even with local portraits. The local portraits are a local, a preacher, and over here, a soldier. But you notice how you have a variety of solutions to these things. Another artist, Jacob Holzer, worked for the Tiffany studios early on, and then set out on his own. And here is an example from a church in Providence, Rhode Island. And over here, you are looking at a window, I'm going to say, that is, I'm sorry, this window, sorry, I'm getting a little bit lost here. Sorry, you were looking at a window by an artist who later on, Maitland Armstrong, who later on also had a large studio, and his daughter also worked with him. Now, What I also want to address is this thorny issue again of creativity and independence and uniqueness. This is something that we need to guard against because it's basically a market-driven concept in our capitalist culture in which galleries are trying to promote artists as being distinct from each other. And that everything each artist does is a unique and unusual creation. Now, think seriously. If you are talking about monumental art, you want a work of art that speaks a common language because it's going to be site-specific and it is going to relate, as I said to you, the client and also the medium and the placement. So here's a very good example. Heinrich Hoffmann, a German illustrator in the late 19th century, was extremely popular. He was reproduced in print, in high scale, low scale, across the board, across all Christian denominations. And so, not a surprise, over here, we are looking at an image of and this is a Tiffany window, we're looking at an image of the boy Jesus in the temple, presented here in opalescent stained glass. Now, some more sophisticated, of course, can be found also. William and Holman Hunt's Finding of the Savior in the Temple. He also, a slightly different composition, although indeed inspired by the same event, was then developed in stained glass by J&R Lamb for a Presbyterian church. I find it fascinating to look at these things myself because you can see how cleverly all this area had to be wiped out, or shall we say condensed, because you're going from a horizontal to a vertical composition. But note, oh, here's this fellow and he shows up here. Here's this fellow and he shows up there. Look at this. Now, we've lifted this up, so we now have a stairs, and so people are in the back. But it definitely works. It definitely works in a way that it has a wonderful impact. Now, the most sophisticated of the artists, John La Farge, clearly one of the best educated, the most European traveled, the one who understood history and who wrote about history as well, immensely respected by people at the time. Here is his window of 1888 for Trinity Church in Boston. And he had not yet seen this painting by Titian in Academia in Venice. But what he was working with, of course, were prints and sometimes replicas, but of different kinds. And here, of course, is a typical late 19th century print that was distributed that anyone could see and also have an understanding, yes, this is the great Titian. He made this window for a distinguished architect. And he even then, behind this image of the guitar player, specifically cites that it was done after Titian. And he cleverly is using, he's getting help with the Latin, but of course as well, but he had a good Latin background. He uses a word like nitet, lucet, that we're talking about a play on words between shining and light and luminous, reflecting the love that the widower had for his wife who died early. Now, not only did he take the Titian and reconstruct it, here it is, the Virgin Mary entering the temple, but for the guitar player, he was looking at models of the kind that you see here with that abounded, really abounded in Venetian painting. Now, that being said, I want to make it very, very clear that opalescent glass became ubiquitous on the, on the very practical, least expensive level you could possibly have. And so here is an example of a Baptist church in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and this is a documented Tiffany studio window, guaranteed. There's nothing fancy about it whatsoever. It is exactly like one would call cathedral glass. Rolled, flat, unpainted, a single layer, leaded in the typical, lead cames. The only difference is that it is this mottled color that was embedded into the glass as it was, being made and put in through the rollers. Now, so we know that we are looking at a wide range of possibilities. And most of what people want to get all excited about, of course, is the high-end client. And that's fine. I'm happy about that too. And here is something done about the same time. And this is Maitland Armstrong. And we're looking at St. Columba's Episcopal Church in Middletown, Rhode Island, which is near Newport. Okay, so we are talking about, again, affluent suburban homes of what indeed was part of the Gilded Age. And you can see that the glass is just treated almost in a jewel-like fashion. This is just one detail. And over here on the right-hand side, this is the Flagler Hotel in Ponce de Leon Hotel, excuse me, and which is now Flagler College, that Tiffany designed, the studio designed, in order to really fit and to hit the clients who were patronizing these opulent these opulent hotels where all people of their same class from widely diverse geographic distances could come and be together. And we know perfectly well, forge marriage alliances, forge business alliances. And so making that hotel the destination was something Tiffany had in mind, and he installed these kinds of windows. The studio, of course, designed them. And you can see that they're done in this wonderful Renaissance style. And here, a great deal of light being able to come through with this ripple glass. It's clear, but it's ripple glass. So it breaks up the light, but it isn't opaque. It doesn't really diminish the light. Because you certainly want lots of lights when you're walking down corridors in hotels. Now, up close, that glass in the church in Middletown, Rhode Island, you can see has something called ripples in it here that come from not just rolling, but actually mixing glass with it, that has a term called drapery glass. And you can see here that these are nuggets. Nuggets, we'll get up closer and see them. They're cast, and then in a way they're hit with a hammer so that they break off in sections, and therefore they're faceted. So it's definitely not the precision of diamond cutting, but you can see that they're meant to sort of imitate the cabochon, which is something used in the type of form of jewel that was cut in the 12th, 13th centuries. Here you see up close that imagery, so you can see possibly even better here, all of this. And here, a beginning of pieces of glass in which you have one layer on top of the other with all of this kind of swirling in the background. Now, this is what some of it looks like on the bench. This is a piece of opalescent glass, an opalescent window in restoration. And you can see here that here they were cast, of course. You can obviously see that they were cast, but then they are set within this lead and solder matrix so that they form a sort of a, oh, I don't know. They actually formed something that was meant to be the architecture of the heavenly Jerusalem. I could say, yeah, that's getting about as close as I could imagine. Now, here is that drapery glass I mentioned. And we see it in a window by Wilson, designed by Frederick Wilson for the Tiffany Studios in 1899. So by this time, things are really hitting their stride. Maybe this is the moment I should remind you that John La Farge took out a patent for windows in actually February 1880. And so this is about 20 years later. So the very beginning was a patent that attempted, quite impossibly, of course, to claim that the mixture of taking what is ordinary glass that was used for soap dishes or things like that, and working it up so that then is part of an artistic arrangement in a window could be something that could be claimed by a single individual. But still, it enables us to see that this was the time that John La Farge saw that and considered that that was the kind of work that he would be using in windows, basically for the rest of his artistic career. Now, La Farge never used this kind of drapery glass. This is something developed through the Tiffany Studios. And what it is think about food, taffy. What you have here is that the glass is set out, the molten glass, something like, molten taffy, is set out on a heat-resistant plate. And then with tongs, it is pulled and folded and manipulated so that it absolutely looks like a bas-relief. Now, the trick about that is that you obviously need to cut with extreme precision because unlike flat glass, you're going to have multiple lines of fracture because glass, you don't cut it, you break it. And it breaks along the lines of least resistance, of course, like anything. And here, this section of glass is meant to be the drapery that is held under this lovely angel. Now, get ready. This is not a Tiffany window. It is not a La Farge window. It is from the 1880s, later 1880s. Obviously, this is a local studio. It happens to be Tufts University. So and you can see that the artist is using that same kind of drapery glass in several colors to show this, of course, is painted. This is the traditional flat piece of glass that receives paint. The head as well, this hand. Tiffany did the same thing. So did La Farge. But here you can see that this is a far more awkward cut. It looks as if it just ends here. How these three go together is, I'd say, again, I use the term awkward. It's not totally unsuccessful, but it doesn't have the sophistication, I would say, of a larger studio where you had an enormous amount of plates as segments of glass that you could look at and make decisions on, as well as you might realize that you have enormous amount of waste once you do this. So this is for, again, a very high-end client, and this is Arlington Street Church, which was one of the signature installations of the Tiffany Studio. Now, plating. This is an example of Sarah Wyman Whitman's stained glass. But plating was far more often used by La Farge and Whitman in terms of creating the effects of three-dimensionality. And so what I wanted to bring to your attention here, how you could see that you have various levels, and you have to have, the glass is laid on top of the other. They are not cemented together. They're laid on top of the other and then finally sealed at the top. But you can see here is a possibility of 2 more layers of glass, which came here. They are definitely, no. And here's another example of what you can see here. This is lower, obviously here. And another piece of glass was going to go and fit on top of this, and it's been lifted off. But you can also see that really luscious marbleized texture of the opalescent. I mean, you can see here is paint. So there is no really, there's no paint in the glass. Each artist is responding, again, can I get back, to the client, to the commission, to the audience, to the placement in the building. And when they do that, it's superb. Now, here is a lovely example. So do come to Boston so you can see it for yourself. This is in the Museum of Fine Arts, and it is a piece of it is a domestic piece, obviously not, it was meant for, not for a religious or a public installation. And you can see that it is a lovely image of a fish. And you can see right here that this is a higher cane. Here, this is a higher cane, it's a higher cane. And this piece of glass is a plated piece of semi-transparent ripple glass on top of a layer that looks something like this to give the indication that this these flowers have gone under the water, and that the fish is diving down under the water, and these flowers are on top of the fish. It's quite fascinating, really lovely. Yes. Now, this is for me a pièce de résistance of the use of plating to present drapery. And what you see is that La Farge was continually inspired by what he knew about historic works of art. And for me, there's no question in my mind that he was looking back at early Christian ivories and looking at that wonderful sense of drapery and pulled together, and trying to imagine how he could produce something like this. I want to assure you, lest you wonder, gee, that seems like a hard stretch, that this La Farge owned a copy in plaster of this piece. So that he really admired this amazing, wonderful image of an angel sliding downstairs here. And you can see here is a layer on top of what are 3 different colored pieces of glass, right? Here, just look at how varied this is and how many layers are on top. So this one, of course, is one of the more significant windows, the Throne of Wisdom. Now, you have equally high-end productions from Tiffany, and here you're looking at, once again, the Madonna of the Flowers, 1899, and we kept looking at her drapery glass before. But here I wanted to point out the sophistication of painting. There was always painting, oh, I take it back. Almost all figural windows. In fact, I know of no figural windows that are in opalescent glass that didn't have painting as well. Usually it was confined to the flesh areas, but it could be in other areas as well. Here you're looking at something called confetti glass. So little pieces of glass are just thrown in and at the end. But just look at the sophistication of the face. Now, that, again, this artist, Wilson, was working with a client, and they wanted to make sure that this window would be set within this older church, but it would echo what the church had. And so here are the mid-19th century arabesques and curlicues here of the border in what was a revival of a Christopher Wren London church. So there it is in its white purity. It's a Unitarian church. And in the late 19th century, the decision was everybody's got stained glass windows. We've got to get the best going. And so this, again, the client and the placement are important. So this is the border, and it's echoing that kind of a border. Now, I just wanted to flip back and say, you see that this is one of the windows in that church. This is an earlier one. This one is 1905. And I'm pretty sure there was another glass painter. The glass painter of the 1899 window was not the glass painter of the 1905 window. And here we see that full window here, and we are looking at the a design by Frederick Wilson for one of the series of windows. And fortunately, that happens to be in the Metropolitan Museum of Art. So it's now, quickly, I want to just sort of say, Tiffany facilitated many designers, eclectic inspiration. In fact, very early on, in 1884, he entered into agreement with Siegfried Bing, the Parisian dealer, to fabricate windows by French artists, including Pierre Bonnard, Maurice Denis, and this one is, it was a little bit later, Care Xavier Roussel, the garden. And you can see that, of course, this opalescent glass is working very well with this image. Back again, I wanted to, again, repeat about Wilson and other designers. He remained for 30 years with Tiffany, but at the same time, he worked for other people, including the Gorham Company. And you can see that it had copyright 1905 by Frederick Wilson. This is an image we just looked at before, but in the many sketches that are available in the archives at the Gorham Company, you can see the same copyright by Frederick Wilson. Now, this, I think, sort of sums it up for you. St. John's Chapel of the Episcopal Divinity School at Harvard had windows designed by Wilson in 1912, but they were not fabricated by Tiffany, obviously. They were Heaton, Butler, and Bain. So here are the designs in the Metropolitan, and here are the photographs of the actual windows. Now, I ending up with just one more observation of the, I'd say for me, as an art historian, yes, the joy of looking at the complexity of a site and empathizing. You know, I feel like I'm back there, right? Empathizing with all of the people who collaborated to bring off that amazing installation of stained glass within architecture. And that includes, right, those glass blowers and the people who are letting it up, and those people making the color selections, and those people cutting. All of those people are part of a complex that if you don't have a harmony of people working together, words of wisdom for life, right? You are not successful. When you are able to get everyone to work together, you get wonderful things. This is a installation in Pittsburgh that is all Tiffany. Now I take it back. There are just a few that are other studios. But what is most significant is that you can see that opalescent glass is being used, but it's being used just like flat cathedral glass. And the painting using Wilson's designs are simply, what can I say, are applied with vitreous paint, and of course some enamels, as you can see, and of course the silver stain on flat pieces of glass. So that I think it's pretty good evocation of a Wilson design, with this very strong image of Isaiah about to have his mouth burned with the burning coal. And this may be the best way you can see this example. That you're looking here, and this is the Pittsburgh, and you're looking back here, and you're looking at Boston. Here you can see how a great deal, indeed, of the design is created through leading, and through, or leading or copper foiling, okay, and through the varied colors and the use of drapery glass. Here, you have a sense of opalescent here that's shining through all of this, and this is opalescent as well. There's an opalescent color, but here you've got one solid block with painting on top. Here you have one complex shoulder, and each one of these wings or scales, heaven forbid I use the word scale for an angel, that's the other ones. So here you see the covering of the shoulder and these feathers all as separate pieces. Here you see one solid piece in which you've got lines dividing this. And I say bravo. You're talking about a large church wanting to have all its windows and a beautiful program, and it cannot in any way afford this kind of one-of-a-kind imagery. So you see the successful communication of artists and clients and needs all working together. So I know it's a whole lot of stuff. I direct you to go back to my online book for lots more information, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you, Virginia, for that excellent walkthrough. Some of the innovations that occurred in American opalescent glass in this period, and the factors that go into kind of these decisions for making windows. Virginia has said that she's happy to take questions, so please do put your questions in the Q&A or the chat. Lots of technical terms were mentioned this evening, so please do feel free to ask questions about techniques. We had all sorts of things about manipulating the glass whilst it's molten, which produces the drapery glass, but also the use of layering up glass, which we call plating.
Layering. Yeah.
So these terms we often use, not always easy to understand, but Virginia does have some excellent pictures which we can look at in more detail.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that I really was taken by this evening is the reminder of how closely stained glass here should be considered within art history, thinking about the influence of fine art. And we saw several examples from Titian to pre-Raphaelite art, and how directly artists were taking compositions from these paintings. And those of you who know the Stained Glass Museum's collection will have spotted another window made from that Holman Hunt painting, which we have another example in our museum collection by Mary Lowndes.
Oh, yes. Yes.
Okay, here we go. Finola Finlay asks, what goes into the making of a piece of opalescent glass versus plain colored glass?
Well, I'm not a chemist. So that probably is something that you could really, really ask for a chemist. All I can say is it's just like marbles. Marbles that people play with, it's just glass that's opaque. You can get cloudy glass, you mix the colors. But basically, what people were doing is that you'd have various pots. Usually, you'd have it just like any other glass. Of course, it's vitreous. So basically, the major component is sand, and then there is ash and colorants, and then it's heated, of course, until it's molten. So what the difference with opalescent is that you had several pots, and you were ladling those pots out and stirring them just enough, and then sending them through the rollers. So I keep finding that, thinking once again about baking, if you want to make, one of those cakes in which you've got the chocolate swirls, you've got chocolate and you've got vanilla, or what is it, white cake, and then you want a chocolate add to it. If you mixed everything up, you'd have light brown cake, right? But you don't want to. You want to have, so you just add a little bit, swirl it, and that's it. So, and of course, you added it. These people know what they were doing. They added them at the right time, not at a time where everything would sort of, fan out. So that and the what is called opalescent glass was used for decorative, or I'm going to say decorative things. It was part of like soap dishes or toiletries, or things, because it looked very pretty, and of course you can wash it, right? If you got your soap on it, I mean, you can wash it off. So yeah, there's nothing. The wonderful thing about glass, or the whole history, I think, of stained glass making, is that there's no magic about it, right? There's no real secret. There's just practice. And the delight for us, except for certain kinds of techniques, is to realize that people were making this, and those people were illiterate. They were just watching and looking and guessing and figuring, oh, it's time to take out. So it's very salutary that once again, everybody's expertise can be extremely important.
Thank you, Virginia. And on the back of that, do you think that it was the start of opalescent glass? They were trying to make a more opaque glass deliberately, or was it the result of experimentation and happy accident?
No, they definitely. La Farge started out with the concept of the object. And early on, people, his early critics were, I'm glad you asked me that. His early critics, I don't mean to say critics, oh, you've done a bad job. The people who responded, to the windows, again, were as sophisticated as he was. Again, aware of, above all, medieval and early Christian. So they had been looking at what we call cosmati work, cut glass. They're looking at the glow of alabaster. They are looking at windows that were actually made of translucent alabaster, and looking at how that light would warm, and you wouldn't have sharp cast shadows or anything, and the object itself would in a way pulsate. And so they were looking at a medieval manuscript, the book covers of medieval manuscripts, and watching how this kind of sculpted image would then have enamel on the sides. So it was that they were inspired by. So there was no question they did not want brightness. I mean, the people who became fascinated about the possibilities of opalescent, they clearly did not want to see a translucent window disrupting this, shall I say, this presence of this object that then glowed Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, great. No, thank you. Thank you.
No, I think it's really interesting in the slides you showed early on, you know, if there's opulent interiors where surface of marble and wood is very important. It's interesting because in the UK at the same time, there's also a kind of move towards not necessarily opalescent glass, but things like the machine rolled glass, which is textured, which stops that direct kind of translucency and transparency. But also things like opus sectili that was developed by Powell's, which although not put in windows, is also using glass in an opaque manner to kind of imitate alabaster and other stonework. So it's a shift that happens in that late 19th, early 20th century.
I think it might also be encouraged by electric light, that you can now illuminate interiors, so that the idea that you've got more, so you then think about, well, what do I do with natural light? Yes, I'm not a slave to, I must bring all this light inside. Yeah, how can, yeah. Great.
And Tiffany, of course, used electric light in his chapel displays at those exhibitions. So I think you're absolutely right about that. Okay, Victor says, who actually fabricated Tiffany style Gorham windows?
The Gorham, very interesting. Yeah, now you're asking, because, right. Gorham, quite honestly, I don't know. Meaning the issue of who fabricated what has always been a little slippery. Because frequently, the studio commissioning or something, shall we say, oh, this is a Tiffany window. Well, okay. I think that there was, I believe, I should say, that there was probably a great deal more a great deal more of studios working with other studios or bringing in people for specific jobs. We see this in industry all the time. All of a sudden, we have a huge number of clients, and how are we going to meet the deadline? So I come from the concept that as long as the work is well produced, that's, you know, perfectly fine. I personally would love, as a historian, to look back and actually find the names and things like this. This did come up as a selling point about something later, with like Christopher Wall. He made it, right, a selling point for his work that it was the hand of the artist over this. Now, that sounds all very good, right? Until you contrast the number of works produced by the Wall studio and his daughter against what else was being produced. So he deliberately kept his work very restricted, but it certainly did not meet the needs of other people at the time looking for stained glass. So that, and I know I have to say that when Charles Connick began, he was highly influenced by Wall, greatly. And he began the concept of actually the same way, listing the people who worked with him. And that only went on for a very short period of time. So there's always this kind of tension we have now about who really made the window. And I think of all those windows, right, from Morris and Company, right? We don't have the names of the people, the painters who made the windows, do we, most of the time? We know who the designer might be, but no one kept that kind of meticulous records. So sometimes we can find them out. I just know that so frequently you find that, especially the heyday in America, buying from, wanting to have windows, is that frequently they were subcontracted to colleagues in Germany. And I'm not so sure that that was incredibly well documented for the client. But but we like to know who did it. I do too. Well, their names are deeply in my heart. Their anonymous work is still in my heart, and I honor them. Yeah.
Okay, another practical question, actually. It's a good question from Ting. Use the use of copper rather than lead, because this is another thing
Yes.
that separates many opalescent windows
Right.
from other windows. Perhaps you could talk a bit more about the construction there with the lead and the copper.
Yes, that the lead was used by many opalescent studios when it could work. You had so many layers in many opalescent windows. I mean, let me back up. As I said at the beginning, and as I said when I was, where was I? Looking up at the really simple one. Where are we? Yes, right here. You can clearly see that these are plain old, what can I say? These are standard traditional leaded windows. With lead came, and they are set, but they are using opalescent glass. Right. So there's nothing magical or essential that the copper foil needs to be used for leaded glass. Once you start, let's get around here to down here, good old, here. Once you start with stuff like this, and you're starting all of this complexity of meandering and moving around, the flexibility of copper that is then encased in lead. So you've got copper foil and then, not lead, excuse me, solder. So then you have solder, blending these things together. So yes, so here it becomes, to use came would be to lose, would be to constrain you in the kind of connecting and flexibility with making something large and small. And here, also the same thing. Yeah, there's no question here. And sometimes you even had, cane, set, with the, I mean, as we all know from restoration, right? There is no incompatibility with having a leaded window and a section of it, then if it's cracked, being repaired with a copper foil lead mending lead, right? We call it a mending lead, but it's copper foil. So that, yeah, it's basically an issue of client, once again, and an issue of design and an issue of execution. But it's quite delightful that that has not been discussed a whole lot in terms of the technical issue and when that first was being used. Yeah, fascinating.
Okay, I can't see any more questions. So if anyone has anything burning, please do ask it now. Otherwise, we will close for this evening. So my thanks again to Professor Raguin for joining us this afternoon in Boston, this evening in the UK, and all of you for coming along. We do have one more talk of this series. It's not next week, but it's the week after, and it's another international scholar who will be speaking to us about the Ulrich's manuscript, and we'll be learning a bit more about decorative plain glazing in the 17th century. And I know Virginia has heard a variation of this paper before, so lots to learn there. So please do join us if you are available on the 2nd of November. And even if you're not available that date, you can buy a ticket and we will send you the link to the recording after. So thank you very much all for joining us, and thank you to our speaker, Virginia Raguin.
It was great. Thanks a lot. Thanks for asking me. Really
Good
wonderful.
night, everybody.
Good night.